All right. Well, good morning, Venture, Spokane. Appreciate you being here this morning, worshiping with us. We're going to continue our series on the life of King Solomon. But as we do that, I want to share a quick story. Some of you maybe have heard this, so forgive me. It's been a long time. But here's a story about a time when I bought a new van. It wasn't really new. It wasn't new, but it was new to me. And you know when you have that new car, like you want to keep it clean, fresh, right? That scent and that look. And so I told the kids, hey, for a while, don't know how long, no eating in the van, right? Let's just keep it clean. They weren't happy with that decision, but I'm the dad, so there. And so 2 weeks later, I take the kids to school. So they went to school near the Monroe Street Bridge, downtown Spokane. And so drop them off. It was a snowy day, icy. And swing back around after I drop them off. I swing back around, get stuck at a stop sign. And again, it was snowy and icy, and a little pickup truck swung around the corner a little too fast, and he swiped my new van all along the side. And in good old-fashioned Spokane style, he just keeps on going. And so, because, you know, when you're not insured, you might as well try. And so I jump out of the van. Now, I know this is a shocker to you. I've never run in my life. So my very first time, I tried to chase that van down in snowy conditions. Spoiler alert, didn't make it like half a block. Car is long gone. And so get back in the car, pull up back to my kids' school parking lot, get out my phone, call the police, to make a report. And then I look over and I see Jocelyn, my youngest daughter, in line, still outside, waiting to go into school. So I call her over, hey, bossy, come here, and I said, hey, Joss, look at our new van, right? And she looked around the corner, and the entire driver's side, just this nice new, gash, and she, without skipping a beat, the only way that she could do it, she looked at me and said, well, I guess we can eat in the van now, right? And so she was grounded for like 6 months. And I tell you that story because it only takes a little bit to ruin something really nice, right? It only takes a little bit, and we try really hard to keep something the way it is. And then once you let it go, it's almost like a lost cause. And I want you to think about that when it comes to like success or when life is really good. We kind of let things slide a little bit. So I grew up in the 1900s, the good old days, and there was this genre, the Rocky and Creed movies. I don't know if any of you have seen these. Academy Award-winning pictures, the first one at least. And so I used to watch these things all the time. And Rocky 3, which happens to be Pastor Brandon's favorite Rocky, it's disputable, but he loves that one. There's a scene where Rocky Balboa, he has been defending his title, right? But he finds out that these title matches have been against opponents that were ranked a lot lower than him. And so he asked his trainer, Mickey, why'd you do this to me, And Mickey looks at him and says, Rocky, the worst thing that's ever can happen to a fighter has happened to you. You have become civilized, right? You become soft, right? So you've lost that fight. And if you're into sports, right, it's one thing to win the title, it's another thing to have to then defend it. And so as we reflect on our own lives, I want you to think about how you respond when things are going really well and when things are not going so well, and what's different. If you came to my house, downstairs in the basement, I have a collection of journals. And everyone grows in their faith differently. Everyone has different spiritual habits, disciplines. It just so happens that God is ingrained in me, I think, love and desire to read and to write. So some of you might have a desire to get out in the outdoors, and that's where you grow in your faith. Bless you, but the outdoors terrify me, right? I would much rather just pray and journal and drink coffee, and that's where I meet the Lord. And but I've found over the course of my life, in the last 25 years, where I've really made this a practice, take away the last 5, those first 20 especially, that I typically will pray harder and journal longer when things are challenging. It's when things are going well that I sometimes lose sight of why things are going well and who is ultimately responsible for those blessings. And I start to think about myself a little too much. Are you following me a little bit? So think about those moments maybe when you got a promotion and you're excited, right? So that means that we respond typically in two different ways. We will often work harder because we have to keep what we earned, what's rightfully ours. Or we start to coast and it's all good now. Either way, it's dangerous because we are failing to acknowledge who really is at the center of my life and who really is the Lord of my life. We do this in relationships too. How often do you pursue someone, right, with a whole lot of passion and purpose? And then once you lock that relationship down, right, and the pursuit sometimes is over, and you take that loved one for granted, right? So I want to go back to Solomon today. And if you have your Bibles, or if you have a smartphone and YouVersion or another app like that, you can go to 1 Kings 9. 1 Kings 9. If you don't have a Bible, it's fine. We will have it on our screens to my left and to my right. But we're going to go to Solomon, and I personally do think in this series, and all of our locations under the direction of Pastor Brandon, I get what we're doing here. We're studying the life, the rise, and the fall of Solomon. And just as another human being, we're going to see the glaring imperfections. We're also going to see some pretty significant accomplishments, some times when Solomon was full of faith, and some times where he wasn't. But I have to be honest with you, we're kind of giving him a bad rap. So let's just be easy a little bit and remember that he's just, yes, he was the king, and yes, he was called. But ultimately, he's flesh and bones, just like you and just like me. So let's make sure our focus is on Christ and what he's calling us to do and what he's calling us to be. But here's where we find ourselves in week 4 or 5 of this series. And you can go back on YouTube and see some of the messages that you maybe have missed thus far. We know from last week it took him about 20 years to build 2 significant buildings, 13 years for the palace and 7 years for the temple, the permanent centerpiece of Jerusalem, the viable and visible reminder that God wanted to dwell or abide with his people, that they were given the land of promise, not just to chill, not just to have a place, not just to be a people, but they were supposed to worship the one true God, being blessed by him that they might then bless other people with the one true God, revealing him to surrounding nations. That was what the call, the covenant was supposed to be. So Solomon builds that. Now he's entering into his 40th year on the planet. Now, if you are fortunate enough to be 40 and above, you know that's a pretty pinnacle year. Some of us deal with it really, really well. Most of us, it's over, right? Just pull up the white flag. My body is breaking down. I think I'm losing my hair. It's sad, right? So here's Solomon. And he has achieved international esteem. He actually has led the nation fairly well spiritually. They're in a pretty good place. He is the covenant keeper as the king, and he's doing it pretty with integrity, with character. And there seems to be a revival of some sort in the land. They're focused on the right things. They're focused on the one true God. He also has, in the meantime, become, funny enough, the richest, the wealthiest person in biblical history. There's some debate here. Some say there's 1 or 2 individuals in human history that were wealthier. So I'm going to say biblical history here because I'm a history teacher and I have to answer to my sources. But it was $2.2 trillion in today's money. I'm going to say that one more time. $2.2 trillion. It's like the Dodgers payroll, all right? $2.2 trillion. Do you know how many vintage Volkswagens I could buy with $2.2 trillion? The world will be a better place. To put it into context, as of Monday, things change in the global market, so I'm not going to be an expert on what it looks like today, but if you love him or leave him, Elon Musk is worth $840 million, right, as of Monday. 2.2 trillion. I'd take that over the 840 million. I'd be okay with 840 million though too. Beggars can't be choosers. But Solomon was doing all right. And most of that wealth, by the way, was through trade agreements, alliances, gifts given. And then let's not lose sight of the fact that God was blessing him in a very public, monetary, measurable way. All right? Plus, he had a lot of wives, so that's a lot of Christmas gifts. But that's a whole different side note. So here he is with 2.2 trillion. And God meets him a second time. Now, Pastor Brandon, if you know him from Mill Creek, our lead pastor, he loves sports metaphors. So when he's preaching this sermon in Mill Creek, he's talking about like the first time Solomon encountered God and heard his voice, it would be like a pregame speech. If you guys have ever played, any type of sports, it's the coach rallying the troops, getting them pumped up and ready to go and get out there and win. Think of this time in 1 Kings 9 as more of a halftime speech. Now we've seen 20 years of rule and reign under Solomon. He's now 40 years old. And so God is saying, okay, let's finish strong. You've done well. Let's make sure we continue that momentum and you're doing it the right way, that you're a man of trust and obedience. And here's where we are on 1 Kings chapter 9. It says this, verse 1. So Solomon finished building the temple of the Lord as well as the royal palace. He completed everything he had planned to do. If you can take notes on your Bible, I would underline or highlight that because it says that in 1 Kings and in Chronicles. It is clear that he has done everything he has been asked to do at this point in his life. Then the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time as he had done before at Gibeon. Marissa talked about the first time just a couple weeks ago. The Lord said this to him, I have heard your prayer and your petition. I have set this temple apart to be holy. This place you have built where my name will be honored forever. I will always watch over it, for it is dear to my heart. Again, I want you to think on this verse right here in verse 3. If you would take time this week to meditate on it, memorize it, hide it in your heart with me. This place you have built where my name will be forever honored. I will always watch over it, for it is dear to my heart. So pretty straightforward, pretty clear here. He appeared to Solomon a second time after he had given him wisdom in the first encounter. He answers the king's request. You have been heard. How often in our lives do we pray and even though we know deep down within our hearts, within our souls, that God hears us, that God is faithful, that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. In the midst of the desperation, when we have nowhere else to turn, how often do we have that small voice in the back of our mind? Will he hear us this time? Will he answer us this time? Will he come through this time? And God is saying to Solomon loud and clear, I have heard your prayers. Not just your prayers personally, but the prayers that you have prayed on behalf of the people that you are called to serve as their king, as a descendant of David. And I have heard your prayers, and I am choosing to take this temple that you have built, and I'm going to make it holy. I have chosen this place to bear my name forever, forever. And I will watch over your people forever. This is his covenant to the Israelites. He has answered this request. He is going to keep his covenant. He is going to show his unfailing love. He said this to David. He's going to say this to Solomon. And he's going to say it beyond both of these kings. He will establish this throne. And spoiler alert, if you might know who will sit on this throne forever and ever, a descendant of David and Solomon, his name is Jesus. He is the Messiah. He is the Christ. He is the anointed one. And so here's what it says in verse 4 all the way to 9. As for you, he says to Solomon, if you will follow me with integrity and godliness as David your father did, obeying all my commands, decrees, and regulations, then I will establish the throne of your dynasty over Israel forever. For I made this promise to your father David. One of your descendants will always sit on the throne of Israel. That's good news, right? And then, as a loving father, as a loving parent often will do, I'm going to give you the promise of the reward. I'm also going to warn you, right? Listen to me, learn from me, obey me, because I know you better than you even know yourself. And I want to warn you in grace and in love. If you choose to go your own way, if you choose to do what you want, when you want, how you want, if you choose to be a people that live outside of my guardrails, outside of the way in which you were designed and destined to live, you will live a life that is dangerous and divisive and destructive. Sin tastes good, feels good for a moment, but it will often write checks it cannot cash. And what it will give you ultimately, the wage that you receive, will be death. And he says it this way. He says, but if you or your descendants abandon me, that's strong language, and disobey the commands and decrees I have given you, and if you serve and worship other gods, which Solomon already was toying with these political alliances that he had made, then I will uproot Israel from this land that I have given them. I will reject the temple that I have made holy to honor my name. I will make Israel an object of mockery and ridicule among the nations. And though this temple is impressive now, all who pass by will be appalled and will gasp in horror. They will ask, why did the Lord do such a terrible thing to this land and to this temple? And the answer will be, because his people, here's the word again, abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and they worshiped other gods instead and bowed down to them. That is why the Lord has brought all these disasters to them. Think about this for a moment. I can't help, when I read this, I can't help but think of Jeremiah, a prophet, who would one day write Lamentations, where he would walk the streets of Jerusalem, wailing and weeping at what sin had cost his people. The exiles, the temple being destroyed. You know, it's easy to read verses 4 through 5. I like that speech. But 6 through 9, I'm going to argue for a moment, is just as gracious as the first part. If you're a parent, or if you have been blessed with a good parent, which I know a lot of us don't always have that story, but there are good parents who sit you on their lap, and even in the times of discipline, of correction, you recognize that they're doing this because they want your best. They want your highest good. They love you enough to say and do the hard things. And here God is warning Solomon and his people, because the mission is far too important. They were made to know him and be known by him and make him known. And if they're going to deviate and worship other gods and trust other nations and live life in sinful, divisive, deceptive ways, then other people are going to be robbed of that revelation, of that testimony. And God loved them and loved humanity too much to let sin go unchecked. And so he says to Solomon, take this seriously. If you don't, Israel will be cut off, the temple will be destroyed. And even strangers in Israel who know little to nothing about the one true God, God himself will make, there will be no there will be no doubt that they themselves had been disciplined because they themselves had disobeyed. I think of if you have ever lived in, rented, or owned a home, or even of any space, how many times do we allow, we clean out a garage, right? And we finally have enough room to wait for it, park a car in it, right? Which is what garages were meant to do. But instead, we put a little clutter in there, right? And left unchecked, what happens to that garage, right? We work ourselves out of a space. And I think sometimes it's what our hearts look like. We think we can commit ourselves to God, but then we leave just one little thing unchecked. It's small. It'll be fine. We'll make room. And before you know it, God himself has been pushed out, and our relationship is distant, if not non-existent. And this is what's going to happen in one period in Israel's history. Now, like I said earlier, we really are kicking Solomon while he's down. I want to be careful for a moment, back up, and focus on the main thing here. Because Solomon is just like you and just like me. I want to take a moment instead and focus on the one that he alludes to here, the dynasty, the king that would sit on that throne forever and ever. And there were some pinnacle moments in Jesus' life, and believe it or not, they often happened on Passover, the greatest Jewish holy day, and they often happened at the temple. At the temple. So let me tell you about that. When Jesus was 12, Luke chapter 2 tells us that Jesus would go to the temple every year. He did not come to abolish the law, he came to fulfill it. And so Mary and Joseph, Mary his mother, Joseph his earthly adopted father, right? They take him on a pilgrimage every year to Jerusalem for Passover. And they get to the temple, and it's a huge caravan of people. I mean, they always did this in large groups. And while they were there, they lost track of Jesus. He's 12. They have other kids that he can take care of himself. The firstborn, they're responsible. It's the secondborn they got to worry about. And and then they're heading home. And then somewhere along the way, they realize we lost our son. Now, how many of you, I've lost my children at the fair. In fact, I did it within this time frame of an hour of each other. I lost one for 5 minutes and one for 10. I babysat, by the way, if you're interested. And 5 minutes, 10 minutes seems like an eternity when you don't know where your kid is, right? Especially in the valley. Just kidding. Now, that was a joke. The truth is, though, side note, my uncle, Uncle Mike, he took me, my sister, and my two cousins to Portland from Kelso Longview in his Ford Bronco. This Ford Bronco in the 80s was awesome. And we took it all the way to Portland and went to Toys R Us. Yes, we had those back then. It was like Disneyland for poor people. And so we would walk around and look at toys that we couldn't afford. And then we came home and we pulled into the parking lot of Kelso Longview of my aunt's and uncle's home. We looked around and realized that we left one of our cousins at Toys R Us. So my uncle, being a good husband, turns around and goes back without telling his wife. So, because, wouldn't a secrets ever hurt marriage? So, I tell you this because it happens, right? So don't judge Mary and Joseph. But they left Jesus, so they go back. It says they searched for him for 3 days, right? So Jesus loved to do things that were significant in 3 days. They find him, and, they found him at the feet of the teachers. And it said that people were amazed. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but they found him sitting among religious leaders asking questions, and people were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And Mary, as obviously a concerned mother, says, "We searched for you everywhere. Where have you been?" And Jesus, as a 12-year-old, he's not snarky because he never sinned, but he's 12. He did say, "Don't you know that I must be in my Father's house?" The temple, the presence of God, this is where I belong. It says that Mary hid these things in her heart because she didn't quite understand what that meant. It also goes on to say that Jesus grew in wisdom, stature, and favor with God and all the people. The temple was the place. He was fulfilling what Solomon could not. He was fulfilling that verse that said, "I have set this temple apart to be holy, where my name will be honored forever." He hungered and thirsted to be in the presence of his heavenly Father. This is where he belonged. See what he could do that Solomon could not. Flash forward to John chapter 2. Now, this is interesting because scholars debate this all the time. Because there's an account of Jesus, of him cleansing the temple in, I think, all the Gospels, at least 3 of them. The difference in John chapter 2 is the cleansing of the temple happened at the end, in the beginning of the gospel, whereas in the other gospels, Jesus cleansed the temple at the end of his ministry, the last week of his life, often called Passion Week. And so some people say, did he do this twice, or did John just put it in a certain spot because he was trying to get a point across? We won't know this side of heaven. But in John chapter 2, it says this, that Jesus, when he saw the merchants taking advantage of people and creating unnecessary barriers for people to make sacrifices and to follow the law, what does Jesus do? He drives out the animals, he scatters the money changers' coins, he turns over tables. And by the way, this all happened on Passover. Again, at the temple. And he yells this out, "Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." The disciples would later say this was fulfilling the prophecies that would say the Messiah was going to be passionate about God's house. God's visible, viable presence at the centerpiece of Jerusalem. And then the Jewish leaders, the religious leaders, instead of repenting of their sins, of their wrongdoings, of following the letter of the law, but not the love that it was intended when it was given, they challenged Jesus and they said, well, if God gave you this authority to do such a thing, then show some miracles and prove it. And Jesus answered with this, "I promise you that I will destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it back up." Now we know what he was referring to. He was referring to his body, that he was going to be painfully, publicly, and shamefully executed upon a cross for your sins and mine. But he would conquer sin and death and be raised again, offering us life. Now his presence not being restricted to one place in Jerusalem, in the temple, but now he would be the temple, and we as his second covenant followers would become his temple as well, what Amanda brought up last week. The religious leaders, still with hard hearts, full of doubt and disobedience, they challenged him yet again. How many times do we challenge Jesus when he brings discipline, correction in our life? And they said something like this. Again, I'm going to paraphrase. He's like, "Are you kidding me? When Ezra and Nehemiah were around, it took them 20 plus years to build this temple, to rebuild it because it was destroyed after the exile. And then, if that wasn't enough, Herod himself, Herod the Great, just 20 years ago, spent 50 years ago, spent 46 years renovating and rebuilding and remodeling this temple. And you're going to take it down and build it back up in 3? And Jesus is like, "That's what I said. Yes, I am." Again, at the temple. And last but not least, Matthew 12. Matthew 12, in Jesus' ministry, he is breaking the Sabbath. He is working on the Sabbath. And when I say working, I mean he's healing. He's doing God's work. He's being obedient to the Father. And his disciples are, eating as well. They're hungry, they're tired, they're eating, and people aren't happy. The religious leaders are challenging Jesus. And in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus says this again about the temple. He says, hey, my ancestor David, your king, broke the law by eating sacred loaves of bread that were reserved for the priests. But he said, weren't those priests sometimes on duty at the temple? And they worked on the Sabbath. Wasn't it more important to be in the presence of God and bringing reconciliation than it is just to follow the letter of the law? Instead, doing it in love. And then he said this, there is now one here who is even greater than this temple. And this is what he ended with. So, if you believe this, show mercy. Solomon couldn't live up to this. He didn't have that hunger that Jesus had. He didn't have the mercy that Jesus had. He didn't have the power that Jesus had. But Jesus himself fulfilled what Solomon was called to do for you and for me. At the temple, on Passover, it was like God was making it loud and clear. I am fulfilling the law for you. In fact, what Jesus was doing was what was asked of Solomon. I have set this temple apart to be holy, where my name will be honored forever. I'll be honest with you. You might have found yourself, like me, in times in life where success was a little too tempting, right? And you start thinking of yourselves, you're kind of untouchable. And so there was a time in my life where I was starting to love. I was doing a pretty decent job of pastoring a church, but I wasn't doing a decent job of loving my wife. And so in a blink of an eye, really, in the course of just a few months, things all crumbled. And I remember how humbling it was to not have any longer like what I held dear, what I was proud of, my identity, not just even as a pastor, but as a husband and as a father. And there was a time where my denomination was saying, hey, take some time, do some work. We're praying for you. We have some resources for you, some therapy. Let's get you in a better place. Let's learn from this. And part of that was that I had to go to a church I didn't want to go to. It was the worst, right? I want to go to a place that I feel comfortable, that I connect with. And I had to go by myself. It was awkward. And I remember one Sunday in particular that I just needed Jesus. Like when everything is stripped away from you, you realize at that moment, oh, this is what he meant. Like, be with me. I want to dwell with you. I want to be with you. I want to show you my holiness, my goodness, my righteousness. I want to be in that relationship. And there's just this hunger, right? I need this. And so I get to church. And I'm feeling isolated. I'm feeling abandoned, right? And I get into this place. I gathered up all this courage, and I'm sitting all there by the back of the sanctuary. And I need a gospel message. And I'm not trying to judge this church, so forgive me if I'm a little too harsh. I might have made it on a bad Sunday, but the pastor just gave me what I felt like was nothing more than just self-help. And it was a cool little, it was just like a 3-step plan to being better. And that's not what I needed. I needed Jesus. And I remember distinctly walking out, and I sat in my car and I said something. I prayed this prayer. This is really what I prayed. I said, Jesus, I know that most likely I will never, ever, ever have the opportunity to pastor a church again in my life. But if I do, if I ever have an opportunity to serve or to lead a church again, will you help me to remember this moment? And that every Sunday, not one Sunday would go by that Jesus would not be offered, that there would not be an invitation to know you, that the gospel would be presented no matter what. And I think that's really what we really aim for at Venture. That's our heart. That's why if you're a part of the teaching team, you'll often get sick of me looking at your notes and saying, that's good, but how does this either foreshadow or fulfill? Like, where's the cross? Where's the gospel? Where's Jesus? We're not going to preach morality at Venture. You're never going to be good enough, but God is, and he makes us good again because of what he did. And that's the invitation simply today when I get stuck on Solomon. And I think these last few weeks we've talked so much about where he's fallen short. I think we have to step back for a moment and say, yes, but his lineage brought us Jesus. And the throne, who's on that throne now? Jesus. And where's the temple and where's Passover? Well, here's Jesus. And this is who he is, and this is what he has done, and this is what he is doing. So now your invitation is, if he is a faithful God, which he has shown himself to be, then will we equally respond in faithfulness? Will we respond by trusting him enough to obey him? Will we hunger and thirst to be in his presence, to be with him, to allow him to do something within us that only he can do? So I'm going to ask you to stand this morning. I'm going to ask the band to come up and lead us in worship. And this time, we've really tried to allow for a few minutes of uninterrupted worship and also time for communion. There's not going to be a formal dismissal today. Amanda and myself, we're not going to say, we'll see you next week, all right? Amanda is going to lead us in communion in just a moment, so please don't leave until you've taken those elements with us and remembered the covenant we have been given through Christ. He is our temple. But I really want us just to take a moment and worship together. So I'm going to invite the band, if you would just start playing that first song. And can I invite you as the church? We're not going to take communion yet, so don't get ahead of me. I need you just to close your eyes for a moment, because it often will help us to just box out those distractions and to take real inventory of our hearts. All right? This is a safe place. In this room, there are people who have been Christ followers for a really long time, and then I'm guessing there are some of us that are still counting the cost. So we're not going to ask you to do anything or force you to do anything or push you to do anything you don't want to do. But we are going to invite you to take some steps in your faith journey, all right? So I'd ask you to close your eyes for a moment. And there no longer is need for a temple in Jerusalem. There is no longer a need for that because Jesus is the temple, and we as his church now are going to be the evidence of his work here on earth until he returns. But Josh, go ahead and lead us. And as he sings, I'm going to invite you to do what Solomon should have done. And I'm going to invite you to do what Jesus did, and that is Jesus had this overwhelming desire to be in the house of the Lord. The house of the Lord is not a church building. The house of the Lord is his presence. The house of the Lord can be found anywhere. Believe it or not, there are Christians right now being persecuted in places all over the world, and they're finding God's presence in a far more tangible way in a prison cell than you and I will ever hope to understand. That means that in the highest of highs, in the moments where everything is going well for you, you can find God's presence. It also means when you have nothing left in life, God's presence can be there. I have been in hospital rooms when babies were born and the joy of the Lord abounded. I've also been in places where we've said goodbye to loved ones. The Lord was there in the midst of the grief and the loss and the pain. So today, begin to worship. I'm asking you, I'm inviting you, let's worship. Let's hunger and thirst after the Lord like never before in our church's young history. Jesus, we worship you today. Praise you today.